Welcome to Decades of Heistery, where we cover safecrackers and bank heists from 1926 up until U.S. involvement in World War II. Tires were screeching, bullets were flying, and in a handful of cases, people were dying in a deadly May of 1927. We will check in on the recently covered Littleton, Colorado heist and its 24-mile-long running gunfight. We'll head to Texas to resolve the recently covered Ovallo heist. Spoiler alert, it was not the Terrell Kimes gang. While we're in Texas, we'll check in with America's favorite female bank robber, Rebecca Bradley Rogers. Plus, we've got white-collar treatment for the huge Pennsylvania Liberty Bond embezzlement perpetrators. And we'll harken back to June of 1926, an inside bank job and the resulting deadly gunfight on the streets of Pitcher, Oklahoma. And we will revisit yet another deadly bank robbery combine, that being the one from Wheelock, North Dakota. First up, we check out a tidy-looking story in the tiny Buffalo Bulletin dated May 5, 1927. It's titled, Youth Tells of Meeting Slayer. It appears that a young college student, David R. Scott, came upon a man named Frank Bray of Denver, Colorado. This appears to have taken place on Thursday, April 28th, quote, in the hills east of here, end quote, here being Laramie, Wyoming. Bray was in the process of dismantling a car. Well, apparently a friendly conversation took place, which must have accelerated because at some point Bray thrust a revolver or something similar to that into Scott's back. Supposedly, Bray told Scott to, quote, throw up his hands, end quote, and get out of the car. Scott then returned to Laramie and went straight to Sheriff Charles M. Cosby and told him what happened. Sheriff Cosby and a deputy named Robert Welliver went to investigate. Now, Sheriff Cosby wasn't a nobody. He served in the Spanish-American War in what we now call World War I. Cosby and Welliver came across Bray and ultimately decided to arrest him, or at least attempt to arrest him. But Bray resisted. From there, a gun battle ensued, with Bray ending up killing Cosby with at least one gunshot. Welliver responded by killing Bray. Some of the nearly $600 that was on Bray at the scene was sent to Denver, Colorado to see if the serial numbers matched those from the Littleton, Colorado heist. Cosby was going to receive full military honors, and his body was going to be then sent to Brooklyn, New York for interment. Cosby will be added to the Memorial Honor Roll for 1927, but the question is, was Bray involved in the Littleton, Colorado heist, or was he a criminal of a different sort? Well, with that in mind, we turn to the Coco Nino Sun from the next day, and a blazing story titled, Captures Car in 24-Mile Gunfight. We join Deputy Sheriff Frank Gully at the Arizona Central Country Store at Kingman, Arizona, where he approached two men. They decided to flee instead of interacting with Sheriff Gully, and the pursuit was on. The drive was long enough that at some point the driver and the passenger who'd been firing shots at the deputy sheriff switched seats, only to resume fleeing and firing, with a total of 18 shots offered by the bad guys. About 18 miles out of Kingman, Arizona, Deputy Gully's car engine failed. Gully actually had to hoof it to Hackberry, Arizona, where he called Sheriff Jasper Brewer of Mojave County. Brewer then ordered all the roads to be closed. Meanwhile, Sheriff Gully altered his appearance, somehow commandeered a car, and then headed to where the bandits allegedly had left the highway for a back road. A short distance from there, Gully found an abandoned mine and ended up capturing a man who gave his surname as Bristown, Bristown, though Bristow sounds more likely. The other unnamed man escaped. Sheriff Brewer believed that Bristown had been involved in a store robbery in Searchlight, Nevada, and the Littleton, Colorado bank heist. So we'll need more information to see if and how Bray fits in and what was Bristown's actual role, if any. Now to the May 1, 1927 Evening Star and its pithy titled story, Admit Bank Robbery. This takes us to Kansas City, Kansas, where we revisit with Clarence Howard and Lyman Ford. You may recall that they were both then ex-employees of the Montgomery County National Bank at Cherryvale, Kansas. I say ex-employees since they both pled guilty for their connection in the robbery of said bank back on May 26, 1926, which we actually covered in our June 1926 episode. For his part, Howard received 4 years and 6 months in the federal penitentiary, while Ford got 2 years and 3 months. Bank President Robertson, also involved, was still awaiting trial. If you are one of those few who saw that episode, you may recall that around $70,000 was stolen and that Howard claimed that he'd been framed by the robbers and never even received a penny. Well, 2 others were implicated. They were professional criminals Lee Flournoy and Charles Mays. The latter received the Decades of History Nickname of the Year Award for 1926, since he occasionally went by the name Pighead Hardman. In that episode, we noted that Flournoy and Mays were unknowingly under surveillance by Ottawa County, Oklahoma police for several days as suspects in the Montgomery bank heist. This is when the 2 were shot and killed on June 7, 1926, in a late night / early morning gunfight with authorities. Of course, we'll follow up if more comes to light, but so far, Littleton, Colorado and Cherryvale, Kansas tally up to 1 good guy and 3 bad guys killed. Now, we've handled robbers in Anoka, Minnesota, and those in North Dakota as separate robbery combines. Our coverage for Anoka included episodes in April of 1926 and March of 1927. North Dakota received plenty of coverage as well, and our focus on Wheelock, North Dakota included November and December of 1926 and January of 1927 episodes. Yet, new information suggests that we might actually put those 2 robbery crews together, making them one bigger, more profitable, and more violent organization. So here we go again in May of 1927, starting with the May 10 Bismarck Tribune. Confession solves death of North Dakota banker. Sure enough, it was subtitled, Man Arrested at Anoka, Minnesota, Admits Killing Peterson at Wheelock. Recall the robbery of Citizens State Bank of Wheelock, North Dakota, that occurred on November 12, 1926. During the heist, cashier H.N. Peterson was shot and killed. Well, on May 10, 1927, a Frank Slim Gibson, and if Slim wasn't enough of a nickname, he was also known as Tex McFarland, made a late-night confession to Sheriff U.S. Pratt of Anoka and Elmer Fleming, who was a manager of a local private detective agency. So here's what Gibson confessed to. 1, he entered a bank at McGregor, North Dakota, alone on the night of November 6, 1926, and blew the safe vault open, but it turned out to be empty. 2, he named his 2 partners in crime during the confession. 3, on the morning of November 12, 1926, he and unnamed others drove into Wheelock, North Dakota, but they were too early for the bank to open, so they drove around the countryside and returned about 9:30 a.m. 4, when inside the bank, Gibson heard a noise in a back room and walked in, at which point H.N. Peterson allegedly, quote, grappled with me, end quote. 5, during the fight, Gibson's gun, quote, went off and he fell to the floor, end quote. Gibson admitted to being the gang's leader. Well, as it turned out, another robber got the money and they all fled together, and later divided it up to be $97 per robber. So I'm no mathematician, but 3 robbers at $97 equals a total haul of $291. However, the bank reported $600 in losses. Because Gibson had been ripped off by at least one of his partners, he readily named the other man. Now, I would like a sidebar here to make a point on the killing of H.N. Peterson. One G.O. Hogan, that's H-O-U-G-E-N, was employed at the First State Bank of Wheelock directly across the street, and he had business at Citizens Bank that day. Hogan entered the bank and found Peterson, who'd been shot 3 times in the head. The Wolf Point Herald's newspaper from May 20th says he never gained consciousness but lingered for 2 hours. This differs mightily from how Gibson explained the accidental gunfiring. So who comprised this possibly one large gang? Well, again, Gibson was the gang leader. He was believed to have committed robberies in Minnesota. He was also charged with the slaying of Isanti, Minnesota Town Marshal Frank Dahlin in December of 1926. So we have Gibson, we have Peter Peterson, we have a Joe Schmidt, who hailed from Minneapolis. We have an Avi Steinmetz of Minneapolis. We have a Lester Northrup, alias McLean, who hailed from Minot, North Dakota. We have a Jack Northrup, clearly Lester's brother, who that detective I mentioned, Fleming, discovered was under indictment regarding involvement in the murder of cashier H.N. Peterson. And he was later charged with Gibson for the killing of that town marshal, Dahlin. Our 7th gang member was Frank Barge. In our November 1926 Quick Hitters episode, we noted a John Northrup, who was 33, and a Lester Barge, who was 26, and that they were suspects in the Wheelock robbery and murder. And we noted in December that warrants had been issued for Northrup, Barge, and a Ray Moore, with rewards in a dead or alive status. According to that Wolf Point Herald's May 20 edition, Lester Barge and John Northrup were related, though they noted that Moore had been in an Ohio prison at the time of the Wheelock heist. And speaking of relatives, if the Wolf Point paper is correct, another of the men captured, which would make 8, not 7, was a William Barge, who was alleged to have escaped jail in August of 1926. Obviously, he would make a possible trio of Barge brothers. The next day, the Bismarck Tribune ran, "Desperados are wanted in North Dakota counties." It was subtitled, "Williston County Sheriff will seek their custody on charges of murder." We pick up with Sheriff A.R. Marshall of Williams County, North Dakota, who was heading for Anoka, Minnesota, with warrants for 3 of the 7, or 8. But he also had warrants for McKenzie and Ward counties, where some of that 7 or 8 were wanted for other crimes, including auto thefts. Osmund Gunvaldson, former sheriff of Burke County, North Dakota, and at the time a U.S. Marshal in Fargo, North Dakota, stated that the gang, quote, worked Burke County for a period of 10 years, end quote. Apparently, all 3 of Gunvaldson's men were former residents of Flaxton, North Dakota, and were currently wanted in nearly every county in northwest North Dakota. And we have a contiguous story titled "Men Are Charged with Killing Town Marshal." For that, we go to Elk River, Minnesota, where we learn that second-degree burglary charges were placed on 5 of that 7 or 8 noted above for a series of robbings and shootings within a 6-month period. Joe Schmidt and Avi Steinmetz were charged with receiving stolen goods, and other burglary charges were proffered to Lester Northrup, plus brothers Ralph and Lester Barge. Presumably one of these is actually Frank Barge. If it's Ralph Barge, that makes 4 Barge brothers. Well, we get more of a localized flair from the Kennebec County Times out of Mora, Minnesota. Story is, prisoner admits killing at Isanti, many robberies. That provides us a focus on the Minnesota crimes and more details from the confession. So this trigger-happy Gibson 1. Admitted to shooting Darlene twice as the gang attempted to break into a warehouse on December 26, 1926. Gibson's apparent matter-of-factness to me is stunning. Quote, "We were standing outside when this man walked up. I fired 2 shots at him with my .28 caliber automatic pistol, and the fellow with me fired 2 shots with his pistol," end quote. Gibson added, quote, "Darlene shot back, getting me in the chest and shoulder, then we beat it," end quote. Before he died, Darlene noted that the man who'd shot him had been wounded in the shoulder. 2. He confessed that he'd handcuffed Gus Peterson, who was an oil station attendant, then shot him during a robbery attempt on April 28th. Supposedly, Gibson stated, quote, "After we handcuffed him to the post there, my pistol went off accidentally," end quote. Noting that a door slammed against his gun. But this sounds awfully convenient and reminiscent of the accidental gun issue back in Wheelock, North Dakota, that may have resulted in 3 bullets to the head and H.N. Peterson's death. And in a bit of coincidence, I'm hoping that Gus Peterson and H.N. Peterson weren't related. 3. Gibson admitted to robberies at Zimmerman, Minnesota. In the second robbery, they end up engaged in the running gunfight. That ended up resulting in the shooting of an area farmer named Ed Turner, who will be added to the Memorial Honor Roll for 1927. Well, here's how the Elk River Woods gunfight went down, according to Trigger Happy Gibson. 5 gunmen in 2 cars stole $1,000 worth of tires in Zimmerman, Minnesota. As they fled, Deputy Sheriffs Mike Auspos, that's Auspos, and Grover Malrupe, that's Malrupe, attempted to stop them. The gunmen did what gunmen do, and they opened fire on the deputies. As the action moved toward Elk River, the sheriff's car forced one of the getaway vehicles into a ditch. 2 men, later identified as the Northrup brothers, bolted from the automobile into the woods. The second car, which contained Gibson and 2 others, continued to flee toward Anoka, firing at the pursuing deputies along the way. Those 3 gunmen had to abandon their car at some point on West River Road, which was about 12 miles north of Minneapolis. And Gibson confessed that they'd actually chiseled off the engine numbers, so had it been found, it couldn't be identified, though he did state it was his car. I think he figured he had nothing to lose at this point. Well, anyway, Gibson and the other 2 hid out in a field for the remainder of the day, and then they walked to Minneapolis at some point that night. Gibson went on and confessed to bank robberies at the Stanchfield State Bank, the Grandy, Minnesota Bank, and attempted heists with 3 attempts to rob the Brunswick, Minnesota Bank, plus attempts to hit banks at Hamel and Delano, Minnesota. And he noted other robberies and burglaries of oil stations and jewelry stores, and even a $1,000 silk robbery. These guys were super busy. Gibson's confession continued regarding the Grandy, Minnesota Bank break-in. He said that he helped bore a hole through the bank vault, which resulted in a tidy $140 heist. Regarding the Brunswick Bank, he confessed to and described the 3 unsuccessful attempts there. Regarding another attempted bank robbery at Stacy, Minnesota, he told how they'd been foiled by a burglar alarm. And lastly, regarding his past incarcerations, he noted that he'd served a jail term at Fargo and Bismarck, North Dakota, and that he'd participated in a $33,000 robbery in Kansas 13 years ago. So more follow-ups to come for sure, but I'm assuming that Gibson is going to be going to jail for life, right? We covered a huge embezzlement story centered on a Charles Knapp back in our April 1927 Quick Hitters. The Evening Star from May 12 provides us updates in 5 freed in bond case. Roland McCready, president of the then defunct Brotherhood Savings and Trust Company, Charles Knapp, bond salesman, John Nelson and William J. Kelly, bank officers, and Frank T. Redman, broker, were all acquitted on charges of conspiracy to defraud. Ironically, or perhaps fittingly, since this is a white-collar crime, Knapp had previously pleaded guilty to larceny, had been sentenced and was actually in the penitentiary. Yet, here we see these guys going free. And recall, Knapp had disappeared into the hills outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, after McCready gave him $320,000 for the purchase of reduced price Liberty bonds. And as noted before, most, but not all, of that money had been recovered. The story ends there, but perhaps Knapp and company deserved a smack for their efforts. The Brownsville Herald from May 22nd boasted the best phone number ever for the model laundry. And of course, they highlighted the Lindbergh story. But our focus takes us to Youth Admits Robbing Bank. Neither Ray Terrell, nor Matt Kimes, nor even the Cotton Top Walker gang was involved. Instead, 20-year-old Aubrey Ray of Stamford, Texas, confessed to committing the March 26 Ovalo, Texas heist. And here's how it occurred. Aubrey Ray and Togo Ray, his cousin, were driving near Ovalo, Texas. They saw the bank's advertisement on, quote, a roadside signboard, end quote, and decided to rob it. For details on the heist, check out the March 1927 Quick Hitters video. Well, during the heist, someone must have left behind at least one clue, because Aubrey Ray was arrested back in Stamford and readily confessed. He even named Togo, who'd been arrested in Durant, Oklahoma, on the 21st. Aubrey admitted that they'd stolen the car in Lampasas, Texas, and showed police where he'd hidden the money. A small amount remained and was recovered, though he'd already spent most of his share, which was about $1,700. And we remain in Texas with the Brownsville Herald for our last story from an ongoing saga. Rogers' trial is continued, was subtitled Former Student of University to be tried in Hayes County. It seems that Rebecca Bradley Rogers' arson trial was to be delayed since her husband, the attorney Otis Rogers, was still ill with tuberculosis and was in Kerrville, Texas, in the tuberculosis sanitarium. Her trial for the Buda National Bank robbery was still set for July. For details on Rogers' insane robbery story, check out the December 26th main story video, and then look for subsequent follow-ups in January, February, March, and April 1927 videos. That's it for our follow-ups and a violent May of 1927. Our next quick hitter video takes us to New Mexico for the first time, and then back to Indiana. We check out a Butte, Montana bank heist that could be related to the Helena, Montana robbery that we previously covered. Just for kicks, we'll check in at a Belfast, Ireland prison break that included a bank robber. And then, of course, we'll head back to LA for more Utes Gone Wild. For now, I want to thank you for spending your time with Decades of History. Till next time.